The 2024 U.S. presidential election is here, and Muslim Network TV is bringing you the coverage that matters, bringing you real-time results and in-depth conversations on what this election means for Muslim Americans and beyond. Our panel of experts, community voices, and political analysts will break down the night's key moments. This election is crucial, and we're here to keep you informed November 5th and 6th at 8 p.m. Eastern on Muslim Network TV. The 2024 U.S. presidential election is here, and Muslim Network TV is bringing you the coverage that matters, bringing you real-time results and in-depth conversations on what this election means for Muslim Americans and beyond. Our panel of experts, community voices, and political analysts will break down the night's key moments. This election is crucial, and we're here to keep you informed November 5th and 6th at 8 p.m. Eastern on Muslim Network TV.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening and welcome to Muslim Network TV's special election coverage. I'm Hannah Zubairi, joined by Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Tonight, we'll be bringing you live analysis, insights, and real-time updates on this pivotal 2024 U.S. presidential election. This is a profoundly consequential election, and for many, especially within the Palestinian and American Muslim communities, it's a moment of heightened tension and deep concern. The issues at stake tonight are not abstract. They touch on fundamental questions of human rights, justice, and the future of our nation. The policies and decisions set in motion will impact millions here at home and far beyond our borders, including those facing hardship and suffering because of conflict abroad. We bring you live reports from key states, expert commentary, and reflections on what these election outcomes could mean for our communities. Our goal tonight is to offer clarity, context, and a pathway forward as we navigate uncertain times together. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah. It's a unique election. A 78-year-old Donald Trump knocked out 81-year-old Biden. And despite 2 impeachments, 4 indictments, and despite being a convicted felon, has overcome Vice President Harris' lead of 5% in a month. What is the power of Trump? And the 60-year-old Harris lifted the Democratic Party of Biden with joy and surprise in a matter of weeks. Has Democratic Party lost Muslims for good as they're moving towards Green Party? Why Democrats could not allow a Palestinian American to speak at the Democratic National Convention?
Very good question.
And Muslims, with Palestine in their heart and mind, seems to be abandoning Democratic Party in droves. Political action committee among Muslims are popping up everywhere like mushrooms. And opinions, Islamic scholars are jumping in the ring with the third-party endorsement and outnumbered by imams who endorse Harris. And Trump, the guy with Muslim ban, he went to a Muslim restaurant to eat halal. I hope he ate halal burger or something in Dearborn, Michigan, while calling Muslim vote for him, vote for peace. Have Muslim arrived in American politics? Well, we'll explore this and many other questions. But Hina, what are the election results? That's what everyone is interested right now.
Well, as you know, the polls have been just closed at 8 p.m. and results are slowly going to be coming in, and we'll be updating you as we get them. We have with us.
So at this moment, Harris, Hina, has 35 electoral votes, and Trump has 95. And in Senate seat, 34 Democrats, 43. Of course, they have existing Democrats. Republicans are 43. So they have just 7 more to go in this. And House seat, Republican 36, Democrat 19. So Florida, Massachusetts, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, Oklahoma, Southern California, all the red states seems to be good in counting fast at this moment. On the other side, Maryland and Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Vermont for the Democratic side. So these are those which were already well predicted.
True, very true. And I feel like so we are seeing a lot of exit polls as people are leaving the polls, and even though the polls don't close for haven't closed in many states, especially with the time differences, the trickle of network exit polls has officially started, and democracy is shaping up to be a significant issue in voters' minds. Democracy mattered most to 35% of the respondents to the National Election Pool exit poll, according to NBC News. And the economy was right behind with 31% of voters, followed by abortion with 14%, immigration with 11%, and foreign policy just mattered to a paltry 4% of the. So is this surprising to you, Imam Mujahid?
Oh, it definitely is, considering the Muslim community at this moment watching genocide day and night. And I think good part of America is also watching. But that seems to not matter. So Muslims care perhaps the most for foreign policy. I think exit poll, they do ask for religion. So eventually those numbers will come out, that who are these people who are concerned for foreign policy. But the whole third party move in the Muslim community is based on the foreign policy issues.
Right.
So question is, did Muslim fail to take their allies in interfaith movement, blacks, Latinos, and progressives? They're normally together on many issues. But in terms of Palestine and foreign policy, that seems to not matter at all. Another thing which surprised me, which was not asked by the exit poll, which is of ABC, NBC, and many other organizations, but Gallup came up yesterday with the likely voters, and they asked a question about character. So only 3% of America said that character matters to them. Among them, only 1% Republicans.
Very, very interesting.
Despite the fact that there's a rapist and a convicted felon, which is being supported by half of America.
Exactly. And it does make us a laughing stock in the rest of the world. So at this time, we do have a guest. We're going to invite Robert Brandon, president and co-founder of Fair Elections Legal Network. He started this in 2006 as a national nonpartisan organization whose mission is to remove barriers to registration and voting for traditionally underrepresented constituencies and improve overall election administration through administrative, legal, and legislative reform. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Brandon.
It's very nice to be here.
So, Brandon, is normally being said that it was, a very calm and collected, no violence and things like that. But it was particularly peculiar that there were 7 bomb threats in Georgia and in a county which is a black majority county. And now FBI is tracing it to Russia. How does collaboration happen? Russia is watching which county has blacks?
Well, I can only say that the election officials have been spending the last 4 years getting ready for this election. And I think they're really well prepared to run a fair and effective election. And yeah, it's really unfortunate that we've seen these random, basically unfounded bomb threats, but, it's enough to temporarily close some of the precincts in Georgia. And they've been extending hour or time that people can vote at those precincts. So hopefully it won't have a big impact. You know, my concern is more to make sure that every American has an opportunity to make their voice heard, and it's so important. And that's what our organization does. We're a nonpartisan organization, but we really think it's really important to make sure that everyone knows how to cast a ballot and knows where to cast a ballot, and to make sure that that ballot gets counted. And you know, we spend a lot of time educating people about the process. We're in court trying to make sure that the process stays open and fair. And we have one of the largest programs in the country educating young people on college campuses to make sure that they understand the role that they can play in making a difference about the futures that they want to live in.
So, Bob, the Fair Election Center, once elections are fair, your job is over, or you keep an eye that whether people will accept the results of the election?
Well, so certainly the work we do with young people is to make sure they understand that their voices are not finished when they make their voting preference known, that they have a role to play in holding election officials accountable, about pressing the issues that they care most about. You know, really in this country, an awful lot of the movements that have made a difference have been led by young people, starting with the civil rights and voting rights movements that really were run, motivated by young people on many of the historically Black colleges and university campuses in the 60s and the late 50s. And certainly protest against the war in Vietnam, efforts to make sure that people understand climate change matters. Mm-hmm. And as you all know, many young people have made their voices heard about what's going on in Gaza and are very concerned about it.
So, do you expect, the elections from election rules and laws 2020 to 24, you seems to be saying have improved? Do you expect the reforms to continue, or it is not exactly improving?
Well, I think they haven't all improved. There have been plenty of places where they've been moving backwards. And, you know, I think we saw, for example, with young people turning out at very high numbers and other folks in 2020, shortly thereafter, some of the more conservative-led legislatures passed laws to make it harder to vote, to cut back on early voting, to cut back on mail balloting, to require strict photo ID laws to vote, or even to ask for a ballot. So that's happened. And at the same time, a number of states have done the opposite. They've really recognized that what's important is to make sure that their citizens of their state have full opportunities to cast their ballot and to make their voices heard. As an example, Michigan, they've really made a big difference in the last few years, opening up the process and embracing the idea that we need to think about all the different ways we can make it easier to vote, not harder to vote.
So,
Robert, I'd have a question about, so you saw in several of the exit polls that democracy was a concern for many of the people as they were leaving the polls. So why do you think, could you shed some light on this, and what do we expect in after tomorrow?
A good question. I mean, I was heartened to see that that democracy was the number one issue that motivated a lot of people this time around. And some of it is clearly, former President Trump has made no secret about how he wants to limit the various institutions of this country that have served this country so well. Has said some things that are just really surprisingly, as you were saying, Abdul, having somebody saying some of those things and still getting them as much support as they do. I think people don't really recognize that when somebody says that they don't believe in the Constitution and that they see this country as half people that agree with us and the other half enemies, that's a real problem. That's not how our democracy needs to thrive. And that's not how, we've been able to sort of help protect the various elements of our society. Newcomers, immigrants, made up so much of the wealth of this country in terms of just the social wealth, not the economic wealth alone. And we need to sort of have a vibrant economy, a vibrant democracy to make that happen. Our country, our democracy, our community, the world is a better place when all voices are heard.
Okay. So we have with us a few more guests. We have with us Zahra Billoo, who serves as the Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations in the San Francisco Bay Area, as well as Jinan Ghazal Riyad, who is a professor of sociology and global health at Duke University and a Carnegie Scholar. Dr. Riyad's research is informed by and contributes to the theoretical issues in two areas of stratification and inequality: social determinants of health disparity and gender inequality in ethnic and religious contexts. Thank you so much to the both of you for being here.
Well, Dr. Janan, one question I have for you is, what type of election? I mean, from sociological perspective, it seems like Trump is talking to working people language and he's winning them over. I was in an Uber just landed yesterday, and the person is an immigrant. He recognizes that it's a lie that immigrants are eating cats and dogs, but he decides to vote for Trump. Is he winning over the working class as compared to which used to be domain of the Democratic Party for a while?
Thank you for having me, first of all, and thank you for that question. I've spent the last 20 years studying the Muslim and Arab vote in the United States, and more broadly, how they fit into the overall landscape. And what you just mentioned hit the nail on the head when it comes to Muslim identity politics. The assumption is that there is a Muslim community out there that's very homogeneous, that all shares the same beliefs, that all vote based on the same shared identity, when that's far from the case. And I think that's what we're seeing here tonight unfold. Had you had me on a week ago, I would have made a strong case for where Kamala Harris was sitting. She's a current vice president and really between a rock and a hard place in terms of making a stand on certain issues that don't contradict the sitting president and undermine her own legitimacy in doing so. Trump is speaking to the base level of what people want to hear where they're at. And what I mean by that is if you are a working class immigrant and you are struggling to make ends meet, it's not your Muslim identity or your immigrant identity that's the most important to you. It's about putting food on the table and about security. And I would say what's happening in the Muslim vote right now across the country is exactly the most American thing I've seen happen, which is very short attention span to what's happened in the past. Trump talking about the Muslim ban, talking about the right kind of immigrant and it being a white Western European immigrant. All of these things are sort of in the past. What people care about is what's happening in their lives now. And I think that's the most important thing to understand, that the Muslim vote is very, very heterogeneous.
Well, we will have to know more about how Muslims are voting. CAIR issued a survey just a couple of days ago, which says 43% of Muslims are going for the third party, 41% for Harris, about 10% for Trump. I don't know after eating a halal burger if Trump votes have increased or where they are. But Zahra Billoo, welcome to Muslim Network. One of the things which I'm happy to see, ongoing genocide in Palestine has encouraged Muslims to participate, but I see so many political action committee popping up in Chicago. I've seen at least 10, 15 of those. Where were these people before? And now Islamic scholars are jumping in, giving quote unquote fatwas about elections, and then other imams issuing a statement which is counter to what they're saying. Very interesting type of a scene, unlike last 30, 40 years.
It's so, assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me on, Imam Mujahid and Hina, and it's good to see you, Bob and Dr. Janan. I've got you all open on one tab, and then I've got the AP updates for every swing state open on the other, and then I keep trying to do the math between the swing states because I know we've run all the hypotheticals, who needs to win how many states to see what happens. You're right. There has been just such momentum around this election. And I would expect no less of our community and our allies. This may or may not be the worst genocide of the last century, but it most certainly is the first one to be live streamed that all of us are watching. And so there is a clear understanding that Israel's unchecked violence against the people in Gaza is only made possible through US funding, weapons, and diplomacy. And so people who care about this issue have risen up, and they are now seeing and fully understanding the consequences of US elections on US foreign policy, and then by extension, Palestinians on the ground. It's a great question, Imam Mujahid. I know you've been doing this work for that many decades, but our community is still young, right? Mm-hmm. And I remind myself of this when I get frustrated with them, is that they, at least Arab and South Asian immigrants, so Black Muslims have been in the US for centuries, but Arab and South Asian immigrants are a newer community. And so their maturation in advocacy, in the systems that exist here, in the funding processes, are going to take time. And I hate that it took a genocide for us to get here. The question I am asking in my nonpartisan work is, what will we do tomorrow? What will we do in January? And how do we sustain this level of advocacy and engagement? I love that the imams are issuing. I don't love that the statements are conflicting, but I love that there are so many. And that from every corner of the Arab and Muslim community, we are seeing all of this push. We just have to keep pushing it, right? In January, in March. And not just after this election, but really, inshallah, after this genocide. Because what we do after it is going to have to be to rebuild Gaza and to ensure that it never happens again.
But Zahra, it brings to me a question. Isolation of the Muslim community. Despite this activism, which sometimes looks like hyperactivism on WhatsApp, I see only 4% of Americans, according to Gallup report yesterday of likely voters, only 4% care for foreign policy. Mm-hmm. And that's an issue on which it seems that whatever Muslims are doing, they have not been able to take their allies in progressive movements and all the interfaith and hummus and biryani consumed on their side. They have gone with the rest of the people, and Muslims seems to have isolated themselves with the party of third party. I mean, is there a reason to believe that we have failed to take rest of the America with us?
I'm going to choose optimism tonight because it's all I've got left. I have to figure out which, unhealthy thing I'm going to eat my feelings in after this and how I'm going to schedule my crying. But for purposes of our conversation, I'm going to be optimistic. I'll offer two theories, and I'd love to hear from the co-panelists about what they're saying, because I see the heads shaking. The first is Imam Mujahid. I don't know what that percentage was before the genocide began. Right. So we're looking at 4% in isolation. Was it 1% before? Is it 4 now? Was it 3? Let's celebrate incremental progress. I think even without poll information about the specific presidential election, it is fair to say that Palestine has risen in the American consciousness in the last year. And that is indicative of broad base building work, of coalition efforts, of protests, of advocacy work, right? People who didn't know about Palestine are talking about it now. But when we just look at that 4%, I agree with you. It can be very concerning. The other thing I'll offer is we are human beings with urgent needs. And I think Dr. Janan, I think it was Dr. Janan or Bob, I can't remember. Someone said this, but like, if I can't pay rent and I can't put food on the table and I'm worried about my safety, then the problem over there somewhere in a land I can't find on a map is not my priority. And so there is still work to be done to connect the dots, right? Is that the police who kill Black people here train with the Israeli occupation forces. The corporations that engage in surveillance here engage in surveillance on the apartheid wall. And as Tupac famously said, they've got money for wars, but not to feed the poor. We have to make that connection here. And so I would suggest that 4% is progress. And I haven't looked at any other data. So what was it before? And that our work remains.
So I would like to jump on the optimism that Zara has displayed and ask our other two panelists as well. What are some of the trends that you all are seeing in civic engagement, especially amongst the Muslim community, that has surprised you? And what are you seeing us doing in the American Muslim community to build power? Because we're hearing this term a lot. It's going to be a part of our conventions, a part of our fundraisers. What does building power look like for American Muslims?
So can I follow up really quickly on this, because I'm want to be very clear on this panel that the Muslim community is very heterogeneous and diverse. And so I don't want to oversimplify what's going into these votes. And I would ask the Gallup poll, if I believe it's correctly, is it asking the most important thing? You know, that 4%, what's the question exactly? Because foreign policy has always been low on that poll. And so it's not necessarily that it's only 4% of people who care about it.
Yeah, the question is that what is the most important factor or issue determining which candidate you are voting for in this year's presidential election?
That's historic. To Janaine's point, that's historically, foreign policy is always at the bottom, and it doesn't mean people don't care about suffering around the world. It doesn't mean that they don't care about a lot of these things, but it's, it is a long-term organizing thing. And the one thing I would just say in terms of some optimism, as I mentioned before, we work with thousands and thousands of young people. We reach on our campuses about 3.5 million college students every year, and many Muslim Americans and others. And the diversity of that community is very large, and the empathy for the basic human suffering that people see around the world and also in their own communities is very real. And I think it's an opportunity. It's what makes me optimistic as an older person who's been doing social justice work all my life about the future. And I do think elections matter, but after elections, the work continues. Just like with the civil rights movement, young Black men and women were beaten and they would go vote, and it didn't make a big difference yet. And then they were beaten again and they went to go vote again, and it kept on going. And eventually you build power and you gain connections with other communities that have common cause and similar interests.
Dr. Reed, let me ask you this. What's the power of Trump? The guy who's a convicted rapist, he's a convicted felon, and he's 78-year-old. And he knocked down a sitting president who is just 2-3 years older than him. What is his power?
So I'm going to answer that and answer Hannah's question about the optimism, because they go hand in hand. So what's happening here is what's happening in the Muslim American community is happening nationwide, which is people feel injustice. They're looking for justice, whether it be, whether their economic situation or the racial situation, it doesn't matter. People are looking for someone to come and say they're going to make it right. And so Trump has this noxious ability, in my personal opinion, to say the right thing to the right crowds at the right time. Kamala Harris, let's remember, she's a Black female. and would be the first female president in the United States. She's climbing an uphill battle to begin with. So there are multiple things going on behind the scenes. And even in that Gallup poll, when people say they're voting that's most important, that doesn't necessarily translate into their vote. And that's what we know. On the optimistic side, what we're seeing, this panel is a perfect example. The Muslim American community has mobilized and is exercising their voice in a way that they want to be heard. Now, we can personally disagree with that direction, whether it be the third party or whether it be Trump or Harris. But the fact that there is such a great sense of urgency in bringing out the young people and bringing out the vote, I think that's a very positive sign. And it couldn't be more in line with other American groups. And that's something that I feel like maybe I'm speaking to people who already know this, but I say this all the time. Muslim Americans are like other Americans. Their identities are complicated. I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a professor. All of those things matter for me. How they matter for how I vote isn't easily chalked up to a survey or to a poll. But the fact that the Muslim American vote is even being discussed in such great, across social media platforms is a really, really positive outcome I see from this election.
Excellent. I think we're going to bring on Ehsan Lekki as our guest. Thank you so much for joining us. Ehsan Lekki is a distinguished leader in social. Okay. So we just heard that she's not here yet. We'll continue our conversation, and let me just ask my producer if we have some of these other guests. We have Tom Hastings with us. Okay. So we're going to perhaps do one more round of questions with our current guests and then bring on Dr. Hastings, inshallah. So yes, this has been an amazing conversation. And I personally see many stratas of the Muslim community very excited about this election as well, because they're feeling like they have, for example, in our area, there are actually people who the councils have come out with guides where they're ranking officials, they're ranking judges. So this is a level of activity and organization that I haven't seen in past elections. We're also seeing, as Imam Mujahid was talking about, political action committees, billboards going up. We're seeing a little bit of this pushback, like, we want to push back against AIPAC. And so that sort of language is also being shown in, in the discussions amongst leadership as well as lay people. And so I'd like to ask all of you, are you seeing this across the board in different states as well? Or is it just majorly a DC thing? So I'd love to get your input on that.
I've been monitoring all over the country today with our staff, and we have like over 420 students that are fellows of ours during the year, all year long. Okay. And the turnout has been enormous. And I think that, the turnout, I assume, with the Muslim American community is going to be quite large. And that is a statement in and of itself, no matter how people break down in terms of whether it's third party or not. That's important, as you were saying. The community is now more in the discussion, and obviously the things you're citing are being done internally by leadership, and that's really important. But the turnout is, I think, going to be really interesting. That's going to be one of the big stories, I think, tomorrow and the next day and the day after, while we still wait for a count that may take a few days to come in.
Zara, what are you seeing out in the West Coast?
It's been incredible. And there has been a lot of concern, sadness, apathy. And it's funny sitting in California where so much of our conversation is urging people to look down ballot rather than just the presidential ticket, knowing we're going blue no matter what and no matter who. But there are watch parties happening at Masajid tonight, right? Masajid haven't traditionally hosted watch parties, and they're at halal restaurants, and there have been candidate forums all weekend. I go back to something that I said earlier, which is that I am hopeful and committed to sustaining this engagement tomorrow and through next year. There's been this, and this happens anytime there's a crisis, is that there's this like rapid upscaling, onboarding. We grow really, really quick. But it's also been evident that there's been some absence of infrastructure. When we look at some of the infighting in Muslim get out the vote efforts, when we look at I love the conflicting statements and the various endorsements that have come from within the Muslim community. And they also are indicative of at least some lack of coordination. And so there's going to be a huge opportunity to build infrastructure around this and to say we have to engage, we have to ensure that we are at the table with everyone, like them or don't, so that come not even 2028, but really 2026, we can replicate what we did this year and do even more so.
Dr. Jenan.
Yeah, so in North Carolina, there's been a concerted effort to make sure that voters at the polls and beforehand, I think, the jokes about getting the text messages for fundraising is one thing, but it's been very clear about what's on the ballot, what's at stake. And to Zahra's point, I think it's really going to be important moving forward to keep that level of engagement, that there's room within the Muslim American community for these differences in voices. To stop the divisiveness from within the community. So it's okay to have different opinions and different voices, and finding a way to keep the momentum while allowing the differences from the fatwas and the imams, which, by the way, in and of itself is a very American thing to see happening in recent history. The Muslim bloc, the Muslim vote, if you will, really came to the fore in terms of the American popular culture and awareness after 9/11, when Muslims really became more active in realizing that to be seen and to be heard and to have a voice in their own future in the United States, they had to mobilize. So I think we have seen this instance in the past where, traumatic instances, whether here on the US soil or what's happening right now in Palestine, is motivating action. And it's going to be important in the coming days and weeks that we stand firm together for what Abdul said was the number one reason that the Gallup poll, democracy, so that we can see that democracy wins. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. And thank you, Robert and Dr. Jenan, for being with us tonight. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Stay with us.
The 2024 U.S. presidential election is here, and Muslim Network TV is bringing you the coverage that matters, bringing you real-time results and in-depth conversations on what this election means for Muslim Americans and beyond. Our panel of experts, community voices, and political analysts will break down the night's key moments. This election is crucial, and we're here to keep you informed. November 5th and 6th at 8 p.m. Eastern on Muslim Network TV.
Hi. Welcome back. So, Imam Mujahid, talking with these experts and hearing their views from on the ground, what are your thoughts?
Somebody has muted me, so I have to unmute myself. Don't try to suppress my voices, folks. I like the positivity and the optimistic tone of Bob, who works with younger people, and Zahra. She has a gear for crying and a gear for optimism. I'm scared. I'm worried. The polarization which we have seen, people are talking each other garbage and junk and this and that. And recently today, Vance called Harris trash. So all of this language of violence, That was what was happening to Palestinian. They were called insects and two-legged animals and this and that. And where did it take? A dominant force, Israel in this case, funded by America, is killing people left and right. And we are sitting here with human rights charter, with genocide, never again, and all of that. So yes, it is good to be optimistic, but I'm concerned about violence in this country. If Trump does not win, what is going to happen? The other day I was thinking, I'm a guy who doesn't care for guns or anything. Should I have something to defend myself? Is it honorable to get attacked while you have nothing to defend yourself? I mean, just imagine a person sitting right here wondering about what is happening to our country. And when democracy is reduced, all the chances for those young people he is talking about will also be reduced. Yes, when the fairness in election goes away, fairness and democracy does not rise. I mean, democracy, fairness, justice to me does not stay at one level. Either it goes up or it goes down. It goes up because we work on it. It goes down because despite our work, we lose. So I'm concerned. I cannot be put a gear of optimism at this particular juncture unless you show me some results which will make me happy. So maybe that will change my mind.
Yeah, we're waiting for those updates. And as I was reading Ryan Grims from The Intercept this morning, and he says, he put out a few things that I'd like to get your commentary on. So he says if Kamala wins, the Congress goes. The chance she also takes Congress relies on a number of miraculous upsets. So Joe Manchin is leaving the Senate, and his Senate seat is leaving the Democratic caucus for the rest of our lives. And that takes the Democrats down from 51 to 50 seats. And then we see in Montana, John Tester winning extremely narrow races in 2006, 2012, and 2018. And so that's something to keep an eye on. And the polls are showing him that he's down as well. And then, so that would bring the Democrats down to 49 seats again. And here in Maryland, we're watching Alsobrooks and a former Republican governor, Larry Hogan. That would also impact the Senate. And so this is something that is being watched across the country. What I am particularly looking at is Texas. So Ted Cruz is Colin Alford, the former NFL linebacker and member of Congress. He's up against Ted Cruz, and he has an incredible chance of beating Ted Cruz. And so that's a very exciting race to be watching in Texas. Now, one thing that
having all this information, but Muslims are concerned quite heavily about the third party and their performance. Is there any media keeping an eye, any exit poll? What is happening to third party? What votes they're getting? Of course, they didn't plan to win, but they plan to defeat Harris. How are they performing? Is there any information whatsoever? Can our producer dig out something about third party, which Muslims have been campaigning, so many imams have endorsed? What is happening to it?
So that's something that if we could get our producers to send us some information, if there are any exit polls about the third party. What I have been seeing across the nation is people are pushing for the third party candidate so that a viable third party can come up for 2026 or 2028. If a third party wins 5% of the vote, then federal funding opens up, or 2% in a state, then state funding opens up for the third party. So to discuss this and more, let's bring in Tom Hastings, a 35-year-old nonviolent activist for peace and justice and environmentalism. He's the past chair of the Peace and Justice Studies Association and serves on the Academic Advisory Council of the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict. He was named the Peace Educator of the Year in 2017 by PJSA, and he's the co-founder of the Portland Peace Team. Thank you so much for joining us, Tom.
Thank you for having me, Hannah. And just to offer a small correction, I'm 74 years old. So I've had a lot of time to look back on a lot of elections. This is kind of an evolution, I think, for every one of us as we sort of examine how we have thought about things like third parties and the possibilities and the dangers of, I don't know, sort of voting with our hearts, voting with our conscience, and then being just shredded and defeated and feeling like our vote it went to the wrong person because voting for the really, really best person actually gave a vote to the wrong person. And this is the conundrum, I think, that many of us have been in for so long. I had one older, wiser person than I tell me years ago when I said, I'm voting for that third party candidate. And he said, obviously, you're not as afraid as I am. To me, this is completely up to us as individuals to figure out what we want to do. But I really agree that at the heart of how we think about this, you mentioned dignity, and that is the core of the field that I research in and teach in. Is conflict transformation requires that everybody's dignity be honored. Sometimes it's called faith, but it's all about respect. And when people do not feel it, that hurts more than if somebody is shooting at them. This is what history shows us, is that if you insult and demean people, or if they have that perception, then they are going to react in a pretty ferocious way, whether it's, and I don't necessarily mean violence, I mean like, you look at the Arab American community now, and it's like, okay, fine. If you can't do the basics, that is required to alleviate suffering in Gaza, then we're not going to vote for you. Even if your domestic policies are great, even if some of your other foreign policies are fine, you completely failed in this piece. And so you just lost a lot of votes because of that. And so
Tom, Imam Mujahid talked about dehumanization, and he's seeing that language of dehumanization in this election. And as we look at this election and we remember January 6th and what transpired right here in our nation's capital, how worried are you about violence tomorrow or in the weeks after this election?
So I'm one of the co-founders of the Portland Peace Team. We're part of the unarmed civilian protection units around the world. And I can tell you that today, as I went downtown to my university, I saw numbers of places being boarded up for that exact reason, is that my town has suffered a fair bit of political violence, and merchants, and this includes small businesses. Like, you would think that they would be at least out of the circle of those attacked, but they're not. There's so many people who are just so enraged that they're kind of approaching it like burn it all down, no matter what. So again and again, in my town, downtown in Portland, particle board, plywood, it's going up on all the windows, or a lot of the windows on a lot of the businesses. So this is a recognition that we are in the middle of an era of political violence, And I consider our city to be relatively safe because we are not an open carry state, for example, like Michigan. Michigan is very polarized. They're an open carry state, and the Meta Peace team, and who has units on the ground right now in Palestine, in the West Bank, not Gaza, but West Bank, and they've been doing this for decades, and they meet this stuff much more robustly than we do here in Portland, and Portland's bad enough. So we're in this very precarious time, and I think for me, it's like looking at this. How can we look at it so that we understand it from a trauma-informed basis, so that we understand the trauma that each demographic is going through, has been through, and carries with them for a good long while.
And this is a great point to bring in Dr. Amina Al-Din. Dr. Amina is our prestigious guest. We're going to bring her in. She's a professor emeritus of Islamic Studies in the Department of Religious Studies at DePaul University. Welcome, Dr. Amina.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum and hello. And I see Henna has the same cough I have.
Oh no! I thought
It's
one
going
is
around.
Okay.
Tom, in listening to you, I think one of the things that I've heard a lot of is the Democratic Party has become so big tent. It doesn't know who's in there, how to control them, says yes to anything, doesn't highlight what it does right. What do you think about that? I mean, is it, I don't know if that's called liberalism or
It's a big
craziness.
tent. It's big tent, but not for Palestinians. They, they got a Israeli hostage-related family on a stage, and Palestinian and Muslims kept begging. A Palestinian Democrat was not allowed to be on a stage. So yes, it's a big tent with a lot of ifs and buts for certain people.
Well, I think, also the guest on the last segment this evening talked about, I was glad she corrected herself, that immigrant Muslims and their descendants are just getting a bit of a handle on this whole political front. It would have been nice if they had asked African American Muslims, but they didn't. But I also think that, many in the Black community, African and African American, have looked at, and I think it was Dr. Janan who said, I'm worried about the roof over my head. I got to put food on the table. You're not talking about any place Muslims are on the continent, Sudan or, the Congo or anywhere else where all hell is breaking loose and many more people are dying than in Gaza. But we didn't take the opportunity, even you, Tom, who knows a lot, to paint a bigger picture of what's happening globally. Stuff in India, stuff in Pakistan. I mean, stuff is happening everywhere. How do we get those in the know to help us get a handle on the large? It's not the first time that Muslims have voted for the Republican Party. And that's their right. What worries me also is the rhetoric. And I think Imam Mujahid talked about that a little bit earlier. I mean, it used to be a democracy. I don't know what it is now. But we need to get a handle on the rhetoric too. So, Tom, I'm asking you, the elder. I love it. I loved it when she had you at 35. Um, um, how, peace and justice institutes have been around for a long time. Where is the peace? And did the justice follow it out of some door I didn't see?
Yeah, so to me, I sort of relate to the notion that Dr. King talked about with positive peace being the presence of both nonviolence and justice. Like you can't separate the two meaningfully. So that's been important to me. And I was many years ago recruited by Reverend James Lawson, who, as you know, we just lost this last year, to be part of his founding faculty for his James Lawson Institute. And he really taught me a lot and gave me the opportunity to help teach some other people as well. So I think that from my point of view, you're absolutely right, Dr. Aldine, that we need to look at the broader picture. When we look at it in a global light, we see that. And I heard a presentation from an Australian researcher. He talked about the war dead, the mortalities and casualties, for example, in Congo, are so massively more over the past several decades than those in the Middle East. And yet, in terms of basically word count in mainstream media, it's exactly reversed. So you find the, like what we're seeing right now in Sudan is that even though there's 180,000, approximately 160,000 mortalities, they're receiving very, very little attention. The number of countries in Africa that are either Muslim majority or pretty much divided equally, who have suffered these terrible wars. To me, I view these as tragic, but inevitable. It's like phase 2 of decolonization. People feel like decolonization happened in the 50s and 60s. And what I tell my students is that was phase 1.
Yeah.
Just get started on phase 2.
Tom, let me share with you something. Today I had a lunch with an imam from Mali. I mean, he's an imam in Chicago. He's originally from Mali. And I say, how is Mali? He said, well, there are honest people running the government, except they are free of France, the former colonial power. So the neighboring countries who used to supply electricity have cut down the electricity under pressure of France. So they have 4-hour electricity. That reminded me, Bangladesh, student revolution has changed the government, and India cut down 50% of their electricity. So you're talking about the colonial variable, but this colonial discussion, last time we were discussing just a few minutes ago, I mentioned only 4% of people who were polled by Gallup say that foreign policy was the critical issue in voting. Economy, number one, and to a certain level, democracy. So people are worried about their home and probably their freedom to think and talk about foreign policy. So why domestic policies did not show up anywhere in the calculation of has Muslim people who were mobilizing others to vote? Amna?
Well, I think it's because the groups of various ethnicities of Muslims didn't push it. They didn't have an agenda to take to meetings, not only with those running for president, but the vice president, the city council, you've got to take it to all pieces. People didn't 4 years ago get in positions to be in the electoral college. It's a whole system here. If you don't like it, that's one thing. But if you don't get in it to defeat it, that's like choking yourself. I mean, we've done, as Tom said, the third party issue. What was his name? Ralph Nader. I think I had just gotten old enough to vote, or I was close. And the issues surrounding third parties was everywhere. Muslim communities paid no attention. Every election since then has had the issues of third parties on the line. But you either got to get in the system to blow it up.
Muslims are just 1% of the population. If they are committed to the third party, it shouldn't be just a day before election. It requires probably substantial amount of investment in time and money to get to the third party. For example, I'm in the state of Illinois, in Chicago, where Chicago is. I'm mentioning where Chicago, Illinois, because we are being broadcasted internationally in UK and other places. And for a lot of them, our elections are funny elections because we have no federal election system. It's just all states and 100 or so different type of conflicting laws and all that. So my question here is that, Amna, it looks like that America, while it is focused on economy, have you seen in WhatsApp groups of where you are, Amna, or Tom, you are, people talking politics and talking about economy?
Some, but they're mostly economists. And people, everybody thought it was a Hail Mary when whatever his name is took the not the mortgage rate, but the interest rates down, not realizing that didn't take their mortgage rate down, and it wasn't going to help others buy a house, and it wasn't going to decrease the cost in the grocery store or for any other goods that one bought. But in our communities, I think one of the things that needs to happen is there has to be an ongoing effort at education, at political education. So,
thank you both for your insights. That is absolutely, I would say, hello. It's been really amazing hearing your insights. I can say I've heard a lot of young people talk about economy, a lot of young Muslims, young voters. They're talking about their new hero, Lina Khan, who is trying to break down Google and Amazon, and they consider her one of their heroes. I've also heard a lot of people in the African-American community, particularly Black women, who are talking about the economy and why they're absolutely terrified of a Trump presidency again, because they will be deeply impacted. So these are all different communities within the larger American Muslim community that are perhaps impacted by the economy. I'd like to thank Tom and Dr. Amina. We're going to take a break at this moment, and please do stay with us. And we are.
It was good to meet you, Tom.
You too, Amina.
And thank you to our audience in the UK who are watching us. It's pretty late in the day, in the night for them, but thank you all for joining us in the United Kingdom as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The 2024 U.S. presidential election is here, And Muslim Network TV is bringing you the coverage that matters, bringing you real-time results and in-depth conversations on what this election means for Muslim Americans and beyond. Our panel of experts, community voices, and political analysts will break down the night's key moments. This election is crucial, and we're here to keep you informed. November 5th and 6th at 8 p.m. Eastern on Muslim Network TV.
Thank you for joining us again. We are back covering the U.S. election 2024. And joining us now is Edward Ahmed Mitchell, who is the Deputy Executive Director, National Executive Director of CAIR, which is the Council on American Islamic Relations here in the United States. Thank you so much, Edward, for being here. Brother Edward is going to be co-hosting this next session with me. And we have with us Dr. Mitchell Brown. Dr. Brown is an expert in the field of, excuse me, just give me a second.
You want me to take it, Hina? Sure. Okay. So assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good evening. Good to be with you, Edward Ahmed Mitchell. Thank you all for joining us on this historic night as we're watching these results come in. I'm very happy to welcome on our guest, Professor Mitchell Brown. Dr. Brown is an election administrator program director and the professor at the Department of Political Science at Auburn University, right next door to me. I'm here in Georgia. And she's an associate editor of the Journal of Political Science Education and a founding editor of the Journal of Election Administration Research and Practice. So her expertise is what we're all talking about here tonight. Dr. Brown, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So, Dr. Brown, tell us just a bit about the work that you do. I mean, this sounds like it's very important work, and it's something that people may not be familiar with if they're not in academia. Can you tell us a bit about the work that you do on elections?
Yeah, so the center that I work with, we have served as the curricular faculty for the National Association of Election Officials, also known as the Election Center, for the past 35 years. We train election officials from around the country in best practices in public administration, as well as in election law and current practice. We also have a team of researchers who work with us, and we study how elections are run across the states and the territories in the U.S. Absolutely.
Well, that's important work. So tell us, in recent years, I assume you've been busy since 2020. What kind of desire have you seen out there for, the service you provide, the expertise you provide? What kind of work have you been doing recently, would you say, is some of the top line things you've been doing?
Yeah, well, in addition to the training, and that has certainly been at the forefront of the work we've been doing, there's been a lot of turnover in the profession of election administration itself because of the expertise needed among election officials and the technical expertise and the increasing professionalism that the field needs given how fraught it is right now. So that's a big piece of what we've been doing. We also do a lot of research looking at a variety of different practices out there with changing laws. For example, we've done a lot of observation work looking at hand counts in places where they happen. We've watched implementation of new laws across the states. We have a training program for students. In fact, I'm in DC right now with 10 students who've been job shadowing on election day. And so we're trying to stay on top of all of the really important topics that are going on in the field right now.
Absolutely. What are the challenges that you're looking out for tonight on this election night? What are you worried about? What are you expecting? What are you nervous about in terms of this election procedurally going well?
I have to apologize. I am not in my office. I'm using the DC board's office, and I'm not understanding a lot of the things that is being asked right now.
Okay, yeah, I think your internet's going in and out. Dr. Brown, why don't we'll pause there, see if your internet comes back in a stronger format, and we'll come back to you, Dr. Brown. So hang tight. We'll see if we can get maybe a stronger internet connection. Assalamu alaikum, Imam. Good to see you, Imam Ajad.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah. How are you doing, brother Edward?
I'm good, alhamdulillah. I'm just, like all of you, I'm on the edge of my seat.
So what is with Georgia? In Georgia, we
Yes.
say that a particular county which has a lot of black voters have 7 bomb threats, and now they are traced to Russia. What is going on here, brother?
Yeah,
What
well,
was
it's not
the
just Georgia.
county?
We've seen bomb threats in Pennsylvania. We've seen bomb threats in Arizona. So it appears to be a coordinated effort to try to, disrupt elections, create chaos. I don't think, we can say for sure who's responsible at this point. Certainly, the allegation I've heard is Russia, but who knows for sure. I don't think it's going to deter people from voting. These are obviously hoaxes. So there has been no actual bomb that's gone off. These are hoaxes from around the world. And so I don't think it's going to stop people from voting. But the goal is, I think, in a close election, if you can make 10 people at one precinct, 20 people at another precinct not vote, you never know what the result could be. Obviously, remember Al Gore and George Bush in Florida, 537 votes could be the difference. So not a good thing that's happening, but I'm pretty confident it's not going to change the result of the election, inshallah.
So you being in the swing state of Georgia, how is it? What are the projections? Are there some exit polls, and how the Green Party is performing there? Because a whole lot of Muslims were supporting the Green Party, essentially on the issue of Palestine and how the perceived Democratic Party candidate was treating them. So has there been swell people voting for Green Party in Georgia?
We don't know yet. As you know, Donald Trump lost Georgia by 11,770 votes. And so one of the things that Georgia Muslims and others who oppose the genocide in Gaza were pointing out to Vice President Harris is if even just a small number of those voters, whether Muslims or African Americans, young voters who oppose the genocide, decide to vote third party, that can make the difference in Georgia because of how tight the margins are. So I'll be very curious to see if Jill Stein ends up getting 10,000 votes, 11,000 votes, 12,000 votes, and whether or not that ultimately is greater than the margin of victory for Trump or Harris. We don't know yet. It's still very early. Votes are still coming in. I'm watching it now. But, in a few hours, we should know whether or not, that third party vote was significant, whether or not it impacted the result of the election here in Georgia.
So those people who were standing, voting, and opting for third party or campaigning for it, what was their goal? Essentially to defeat Harris?
No, I think if you talk to, for example, members of the No Peace Coalition, they were actually calling on Vice President Harris to commit to suspend offensive weapons to the Israeli government. And if she had promised to do that, they said, we're going to vote for you. And if you don't do that, they said, many of us will not be able to vote for you. These are voters who absolutely do not want to see Donald Trump in office, but many of them just said, as a matter of principle, we can't bring ourselves to vote for Vice President Harris if she doesn't break with Biden on Gaza. So I'll be curious to see how many of those voters ended up actually supporting the vice president or voting third party or staying home. Obviously, from my perspective, and I think the Muslim community's perspective, we want everyone to vote, no matter who you're voting for, Harris, Stein, Trump. We want to make sure people are making their voices heard. And my hope is that we're going to see high turnout from all communities, including the Georgia Muslim community, no matter what the election result is. By the way, it looks like Dr. Brown is back. She's got good internet.
Professor Brown, can you hear us?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. So I have a question for you. So we've been talking about the third party a lot. So third party candidates often raise critical issues that are ignored by major parties. So do you think these voices will be effective in shaping any policy post-election?
Third parties have the best chance of affecting policy post-election when it's clear that a lot of people really support them and support their messages and one of the ways this happens is by attracting a number of voters, though one of the effects that this has when we see it happen is take away voters from one party or another. And so one of the questions out there always about third party candidates is, you know, which is the worst of two devils, to use maybe a negative analogy sometimes, and is it best to vote for that third party candidate so you can really lift up some of those policy issues that you think are vital that the major two parties aren't paying attention to, or is it best to go with one of those two parties?
Yeah, interesting. So I did want to ask all three of you. Let's imagine, because we've been hearing about this a lot, and many people have been scared into voting because the potential of a Trump victory. So if Trump wins, let's take seriously what Trump actually can do or will do versus what his opponents claim that he'll do. So what are some things that Professor Brown and Brother Edward and Imam Mujahid, all three of you, really believe could happen if Trump does become our next president?
Well,
Go ahead, Dr. Brown. No, please, by all means.
One of the things Trump's promised to do right away is some pretty draconian things with our immigration system. Though it's not really clear how effective and how quick he would be able to be with some of the things that he's promised on the campaign trail. And my expectation is a lot of those things that he's promised, he will in fact not be able to accomplish, particularly as quickly as he thinks he can accomplish those things. And so I'll say that to start.
I think Muslim ban, he will come up with some sort of it because he has promised to do that, because that's easy to do that. Because also, according to CARE survey, which came out, only 10% people are voting for him. In the last election, I think it was 9% Muslim this time, despite he ate some halal burgers in Michigan. Only 10% people probably, according to that survey, is if it is the same as the actual one. So he will do some of those things, but it is not a policy issue about him. To me, America, when they were asked about character, does character matter in voting in this candidate or that candidate? Only 4% of Americans agreed with Gallup on that issue. To me, it's a character of a nation. A rapist, a convicted felon, a person who uses vulgar language, who demonizes people, immigrants, Americans, anybody. Half of my country voting for it, I'm worried for our country, not as much as about Trump. So to me, his haphazardness, his direction to accept all the dictators in the world and disrupt whatever systems are in place. When you do those things, things get harmed. Economy could be harmed with too much experimentation, because America needs immigrants. We're not producing enough children. And even if we start producing enough children today, as Trump backer Elon Musk is asking America to do, it will take some time for them to grow up. So this country needs immigrants. And if there are not proper immigration reform to have immigrants available here as a workforce, who's going to work? So disruption is what he's all about, whether it's economy or international system. I don't consider him to be a peace candidate, as he promised some Muslims in Michigan that he will be the peace candidate, peace president.
Edward, you're a lawyer. What are your thoughts, especially about the Supreme Court? And
No. Ask him. He's a lawyer. When are you going to file a first lawsuit on him?
First lawsuit, exactly. And I'd like to know, what are your thoughts about him going after the American university system? We've seen it happen in Florida. What has been done there? Are you worried about American universities?
Look, so first, it is 9:21 p.m., which means there's still people voting in the United States. So that means that as the deputy director of CARE nonprofit, I still cannot make political statements about any candidate's position. So I'm going to have to be careful in what I say. What I will say is this, is that our organization, and I think the American Muslim community in general, had made preparations for either scenario, whether it's a Trump victory, a Harris victory. There are going to be challenges that come with either president. There are going to be opportunities that come with either president. And so I think we're all getting ready for either scenario or something unexpected. President Trump, as a candidate, has made it very clear, and you can look at our voter guide that notes this, that one of his commitments is to crack down on protesters on college campuses who advocate against the genocide in Gaza. And so to the extent, that becomes an issue next year, that we're having to legally defend the rights of students, that's something that CARE is obviously prepared to do. When it comes to issues of religious freedom that might be at risk if there's democratic control of all levels of power, well, we're ready to defend religious freedom as well. So, we are nonpartisan. We don't have a preference. We just prepare for any outcome, and I think we're ready to do that. One last thing I will say is that before we even get to next year, I'm really curious to see whether or not everyone accepts the election results. Not only President Trump and Vice President Harris, but also Congress, because as you all know, Congress has to certify the Electoral College results. And if the House, for example, tries to do what they did back in 2020, just refuses to certify certain states, that could actually throw our electoral system into chaos. So I'll be very curious to see if everyone actually accepts the results so that we can get to a peaceful transition of power next January, no matter who that transition of power is going to.
Edward, that's a very important point, considering that the current speaker, he was among those people who are coming with legal explanation of denying President Biden his certification. And he's the Speaker of the House. Is that the secret they were talking about?
Well, I don't know, but it's important to note that back in 2020, Republicans did not control the House of Representatives, and so they voted to oppose Biden's elevation or certification, but they weren't a majority, so they couldn't stop it. This time, they are the majority in the House of Representatives, so it's a different scenario. And so, if the House GOP were to refuse to certify, for example, a Harris victory, if that's what would happen, we'd be in a very interesting ballgame in terms of American history. But again, we'll see. That's what I'm curious about.
Okay.
So this is a good time to bring in our next guest, Zainab Ali. Biza Zainab Ali is an adjunct professor at Columbia University and at Barnard College. So thank you so much, Zainab, for being here with us. And we'd love for you to join in this conversation. You've been following us in the studio. What are your thoughts?
Thank you so much for having me. I was listening to this conversation. It's like, really nice to be speaking to a group of people, who are, I think at the same wavelength. We are all, I think, at this point in time. So I'm joining from New York. And I can share with you what all I have been seeing all day and in the previous weeks as well, the ways in which specifically because I work with young people. So there was one thing that was very noticeable in during this electoral process. One of the things that we, I think, noted as academics was that there was a large group of people who are, in Professor Jeffrey Sachs' word, very conscientious, non-voters. So a lot of people came back and they were like, we are conscientiously not voting. So this was a new trend, which I have not seen in the past 3-4 elections. I have never actually, there was always a sense of purpose. So this was something that we noted. And previously also, for example, if I were to talk about the trends that we were witnessing in New York, there were long lines of early voters, and there was a very particular and noticeable absence of a group of a particular demographics, right? Middle Eastern voters, South Asian voters. A lot of young people are not voting. So these are some of the things that were happening today, and we were speaking about it earlier. And I'm not sure how this contributes, but these are some of the things that are noticeably happening in terms of the university related.
And that is a somber note. And obviously, a lot of the young students who have been through a lot, they have been the face of the resistance, the struggle against this genocide in the United States. And so, for them not to be at the polls, so we've heard from other groups that they did see a rise in youth voters across the states. But anecdotal, you're saying you haven't seen many youth voting at the polls. So this is we'll find out more tomorrow and as the results come in. But Dr. Brown, if you'd like to comment on some of the trends that you've been noticing.
Before we do that, let me share with you. At this moment, Trump has 178 electoral votes, and Harris has 99. And New York Times is projecting that Trump will get 285 electoral votes as compared to Harris's 253 votes. But of course, evening is still on. All results are not in, but that's the projection.
Thank you so much for that update, Imam Mujahid. Dr. Brown.
So I'll start by saying that I was out today looking at polls in the Washington, D.C. area, and I did see actually a lot of, at the polling places near college campuses, a lot of youth vote out there. And so, and I've heard again anecdotally about people who are out in Philadelphia that there was a significant youth vote and really strong turnout there. And I will also say, well, it looks like from some of the early results that are coming in to the projections that were just shared, the projections right now are very much looking strongly in favor of Trump, but there's still a number of states to be called, and we don't quite know yet. And I think the game's not over. So let me start there, and I want to be a good member of the panel, and so I want to actually answer the question that you asked me, and now I can't remember what it was.
But I would share this much while you remember what the question was. That I passed by in downtown. It was downtown Chicago. It's not a swing state. It was raining pretty hard. I was all wet, and I saw close to 150 young people standing in line, soaking in that rain, trying to vote in a state which is not a swing state. So I think we still need to wait for a proper exit poll about how young people did, and also the performance about the third party. I mean, wherever they were organized. In Illinois, they could not muster 40,000 signatures, so they were not on the ballot, so they were a write-in candidate. So young people who are supporting them probably will have to wait until some of that information comes out.
Definitely. So one of the questions that people are asking about this election is, does it make a difference one of the trends that I've noticed in people who have been sort of turned off by the election is they feel that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are essentially the same, with a little bit of differences. And those differences have become, especially since the Democrats have moved much more to the center, and they don't find themselves under this big tent that they had felt like they were in 4 or 5 years ago. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that. Is this something that you all are noticing as well? And is this concerning?
Yeah, I'll jump in here and say that while it is true that Harris as a candidate is a much more moderate candidate, in part because she's a former prosecutor, and she's also been trying to encourage independents and moderates to vote for her and not vote for Trump. What that has done is essentially shifted the tenor of the Democratic campaign to the center, and so slightly more right. But I think one of the other things to keep in mind as we think about what's happening with American politics right now, and why this election is so important, is because Trump completely disrupted the Republican Party as we knew it, and as we knew it for a very long time. And one of the big questions moving forward in terms of are the Democrats and the Republicans really the same party, you know, a distinction without a difference, which is a narrative about American politics that we hear particularly from other countries that have multi-member districts with proportional representation, and you get a lot more diversity in the voices because you have so many different parties out there that the U.S. politics are, you know, the two major parties are, you know, essentially the same thing. But what Trump did to the Republican Party and what he's done to the Republican Party is disrupt that party so much that it's unrecognizable to traditional Republicans. And this election, I think, will either solidify that for the Republicans moving forward or disrupt it. And I think one of the things that a moderate Democrat Party was sort of hedging on was getting him out and trying to stop the Republicans from going where they were going under the Trump presidency and under the Trump leadership of the Republican Party.
Professor Brown, you mentioning that she is a moderate and have moved towards slightly towards the center. Has the counter change happening on the Republican side, that it has moved towards a little bit more towards working class people? And has, and the second question will be, has Harris so far benefited from moving towards the center?
Well, the results right now don't appear that she's benefited from moving towards the center, right? And particularly if you look at Georgia, there are a couple of big media outlets right now that are calling Georgia for Trump, which would mean that the Democratic Party hasn't actually benefited from that. Though on the same, you know, at the same time, there are some that are calling Pennsylvania for Harris, and you know, while we don't know for sure about either of them yet. It's pretty hard to see what's going on there. Trump has certainly moved part of the rhetoric, at least of the Republican Party, towards working class people. But I don't think his policies reflect that, or particularly his economic policies reflect that. And so it will be interesting to see if he becomes the next president, what really happens for working class people who are attracted to him because of the rhetoric and because of his style, if his policies actually deliver for them.
So very true. As we're looking at, so some of the Harris is projected to pick up Rhode Island, and Republicans are slated to win some down ballot races in North Dakota. Louisiana is projected to go to Republicans as expected. And Harris, as you said, is up in Pennsylvania, but lots of election day votes to come. Are there any local and state elections that down the ballot that both of you are watching closely?
I think one of the more interesting ones is the North Carolina governor race, which has clearly gone to the Democratic Party, even though it looks like North Carolina for the president is going to go for Trump. I think that's been a really interesting election to watch.
What about you, Zainab? Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. No, I was, I mean, I don't want to also speculate, but because, in New York, I feel like, and I'm sorry, I'm just speaking for New York because, we live in a bubble. And we also have like the biggest Muslim population in the US, and we have like about 800,000 Muslims living in New York. So it's, I think, a significant thing to talk about. But in terms of, and I kind of forget part of your question, but I think you were asking about, the future electoral
Wondering if there were any
trend.
local races, any particular races that you were watching very closely, aside from the
Right.
president elections.
Right. So I think we were, I mean, I don't think there were any particular races we were watching because there's already a lot of drama happening, for our local context. One of the things I feel that people are concerned about at this point in time is the, I think, ways in which the, the whoever is is the winner, the ways in which they will acknowledge and um, make peace, especially after having gone through all the trauma that we have, as I'm talking about the Muslim vote. There is what we feel like a, a complete invisibilization of the violence, of the political violence, right? So I think people who have been speaking about these, concerns, the only party at this point has been the third, party. So I think most of us were concerned about, the third party candidates, how they were doing. And specifically when, some of the earlier speakers were also talking about the students. And when I say, because I think I'm going against the stream from what the other speakers are saying here, because I believe, in Chicago and elsewhere, there was a lot of young people coming out. But I mean, I would like to, kind of point out that in New York, and I specifically, the institutions I've been um, affiliated with. If you remember what happened at Columbia University, I think a lot of young people, and also elsewhere in New York, at New York University as well. There's the trauma from the last, the entire year, not just from the Palestinian genocide, but I think there is completely, something else that we are witnessing here in New York. That is, I think, very different from other places as well.
Yes, you had a major scandal with your mayor's office as well. Can we bring Brother Edward back in? Edward Mitchell.
Edward is here.
Yeah, I'm here, Hannah.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, I'm not able to see the entire screen. But,
yeah, sure.
But Edward, yes, let's take this conversation forward. Any responses to what you've been hearing from any of our panelists here today?
So, one thing I want to note, watching the results come in is that, we have no idea what's going to happen, but it certainly seems like the Democratic activists, liberal journalists sound very nervous. Georgia, North Carolina, other states that they thought might have been going to Harris or might be close seem to be leaning towards Donald Trump. States that Harris is expected to win seem to be a lot closer than you would have thought they would be. And so it's very early, but I'm having flashbacks of 2016, kind of the same tone that I remember hearing back then, that same little tenor. But again, we'll see in a few hours, God willing. I think the key states to watch are Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. It appears those are the states that Harris absolutely cannot lose. Everything else, Georgia, North Carolina, if she loses, she could still win. But if she loses one of those, she's in deep trouble. So the night is getting very interesting, very early.
Well, you mentioned, later in the evening, some people are saying it may take until Thursday or a week for us to know where those things are.
That's what happened in 2020. Yeah, I remember that. Yes. Hopefully they're better at it this year than they were 4 years ago. But maybe Dr. Brown can tell us about whether or not improvements have been made. Since 2020 to
My
speed up the
question
process.
exactly with Dr. Brown is that how come the Florida and all these red state have their systems so perfect, the results are out?
Yeah, so the answer to that is about the different ways in some states they allow people to vote and the time it takes to process those different kinds of ballots, as well as what the state rules are about when you can start counting ballots. And so for states that use mail balloting, they often use signature verification rather than some kind of photo ID like you would see in Florida, like you would see in Alabama. And the process of making sure that the right ballot came back from the right person, that the signatures match, and then removing the ballot so that person then has secrecy about who they voted for, processing those ballots, it takes a little bit longer to go through those processes. So they might be more convenient, they might be easier for voters in those states, but particularly if in their state they're not allowed to start processing or counting those ballots until election day, it delays the amount of time it takes for us to know what's going on. And so to the extent that we're going to keep those kinds of practices in the US, it means then that what we're going to also have to start doing is be more patient on instead of wanting to know election night who the winner is, we might need to consider as a society being able to hold our breath instead of having instant gratification and waiting 3 days or waiting a week.
Well,
Edward, I'd like to talk a little bit about the poll that CARE did recently,
Yes.
where you found that Stein led Harris amongst groups in several swing states, including Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona. So are we seeing any of this playing out as the results are coming in? I don't see the results for Michigan yet.
So a few things. So we did a poll in August after the Democratic National Convention. So after Harris was the clear nominee, after Trump is obviously the nominee. And at the time, among American Muslim voters, Harris and Stein were almost exactly tied. I think Harris had 29.4% and Stein had 29% even. And then you had about 10% or 11% voting for Donald Trump and quite a bit of Muslims undecided. And when we broke that down into swing states, as you noted, Stein was leading in some states like Michigan, whereas Harris was leading in states like Georgia and Pennsylvania. And so you saw a very clear divide. When you looked further, you saw a racial breakdown that African-American Muslims were the most likely to be supporting Kamala Harris, about 53%, while most other Muslims were the other way around, supporting Stein for the most part. And then gender-wise, actually, women were more likely to support Jill Stein than men in that poll. Jump forward to a few weeks ago, just last week, we did our final poll, and it showed that 42% plan to vote for Stein, 41% plan to vote for Harris, again, among the Muslim community, and that Donald Trump had fallen just a bit down to 10%. And so this always appeared to be a race not between Harris and Trump, but between Harris and Stein and the Muslim community. The question now will be whether or not that support for Stein is significant enough that it actually tilts or tips the result of any states. I'm not sure that it will, given how relatively small the American Muslim population is. But in a state like Michigan and in a state like Georgia, it really could make a difference, again, because of the small margins and the large population of Muslims in those states. So I'll be very curious to see, again, what Stein's numbers look like in these states and how those numbers compare to the margin of victory for Harris or Trump. One of the things that American Muslims were saying over and over again to the Harris campaign was, you need to go further on the issue of Gaza in order to address the concern that we have. That was what many American Muslims are saying to the Harris campaign. So we'll see whether or not there is a result that is decided based on the campaign's decision on the Gaza issue.
And we saw that change in the rhetoric that was coming out from the White House too. Just yesterday, there was a message sent out that Kamala will end the war. I know my phone has been blowing up with messages from the Harris campaign time after time. You know, it's just at some point you're just like, can we turn this off now and not ask for any more money? But yes, this has been definitely. Dr. Brown, you were saying something.
I wasn't, but I'm happy to. I think that these comments or the figures from this poll actually speak very well to the issue that we were talking about earlier about the role of third-party candidates and what effect they have. And if the Muslim community really is supporting Stein to the extent that affects Harris, presuming then that the vote would be for Harris as opposed to for Trump, that's a real problem for Harris. And if the election comes down to 10,000 votes or 2,000 votes in a particularly tight state, it again speaks to this issue, this constant battle we have in the US about these third-party candidates for presidency, and a real challenge for people about how they cast their ballots and what the effects of how they cast those ballots might be.
Let me ask Edward. So Professor Brown says it will be a challenge for Harris if the third party venture causes her to lose certain swing states or lose the election. Do you think if that happens, will it result in the empowerment of the Muslim community? That Democrats will say, we wish we have heard more to this 1% of the population, or it will be simply ignored, or worse, Muslim will be blamed for the loss of Harris?
You know, there are different theories about that. I've heard some Muslim political analysts say that if the election is close, or if Harris were to lose because Muslims did not vote for her because they withheld their votes, some people say, well, that would empower American Muslims, show that we're a political force and that we have to be listened to, and the next time around, the Democrats have to make sure they don't support genocide. That's one theory that some Muslim analysts will say. The other theory, though, that you'll hear is that, no, this will actually create a backlash, that many of the groups that work with Muslims, Latino groups and other groups that are not going to be targeted potentially by the new president, they're going to be upset at the Muslim community, and that Muslims will be in a much more difficult, isolated political place. And the other theory that you hear is that, well, it's not going to make a difference anyway, because if Harris loses, it's likely going to be because of factors much greater than and more significant than the issue of Gaza and the Muslim vote. And so Muslims won't get blamed or rewarded no matter what happens. So there are different theories, out there. I think there is logic to all of them. And again, I think the key thing will be the margins. Right now, for example, I just checked. So Jill Stein is getting 11,000 votes, give or take, in Georgia. That's the margin of victory that Trump lost by back in 2020. So that's interesting. But Harris right now is losing Georgia by tens of thousands of votes. So the Jill Stein factor really does not make a difference unless the race becomes much more narrow. And so again, the margins, I think, will matter in terms of determining whether or not Muslims voting third party made some sort of difference in the outcome of the election.
What do you say, Professor Brown, is the history of third party in which after they cause certain candidate to lose, what has been the pushback, or the what were the benefit for third party if they cause to some other candidate to lose?
Well, it's a constant question. Will the parties pay more attention to because usually those third parties have one or two key issues that they care strongly about. And the question always is, will the party that's most aligned with that third party actually pay attention to those issues moving forward? And sometimes they do. Or will people be angry at that third party and blame that third party and therefore double down on how much they reject those issues? And sometimes they do. And so it's really hard to say. I want to, I'll jump back to one of the things that was said a moment ago. And that is, would it be really this that defeats Kamala Harris, or these particular sets of issues that defeat Kamala Harris? And my guess is it won't be. I would guess that if Kamala Harris doesn't win, particularly given all of the negative press that Trump has had about his treatment of women, about criminal activity, about other things that we've known about for years that the American people don't really care about that much, that for his supporters, it comes down to the economy and party. And for the people sort of in the middle, that maybe it will come down to a rejection of a minority female candidate, and that the U.S. is just not ready for that.
Hina, you are mute.
I was going to say the same thing, that America, I do not think, is ready for a person of color, woman president. And despite everything that we see, and I don't believe if Harris doesn't win, it will be just because of Gaza. There are many missteps that the Democratic Party has made in the 4 years they've been in power. They are not able to push policy, unlike what we see when the Republicans are in power, where there are executive orders coming through, lots of changes being made, lots of bills being passed. The people haven't seen that. And also the fact that Biden held on to his position and didn't step down much earlier has also given much less time for Kamala to campaign and be out on the campaign trail. She also has not been able to set herself apart from Biden. In the last debate, people asked, she was asked the question, "What would you do different?" And she said nothing at all. And so that is so much more, I believe. So having this put on the American Muslim community or the Palestinian community, I think would be perhaps too much projection. And I agree with you. My producer is saying that we do have some clips from Michigan. I do want to just go back to Michigan for a little bit. Trump's narrow victory in Michigan in 2016 marked the only time a Republican presidential candidate carried the state since 1988. Biden won it back by 3 points in 2020, and improving on Hillary Clinton's results amongst independents, voters from union households, and suburban voters. So all three groups may be key again this year. So just just broadening that scope, that this is about what a Trump victory might look like if he wins Michigan. And the plurality of, according to ABC News, the plurality of Michigan voters, 38% say that U.S. support for Israel is about right. The rest divide between saying it's too strong, or 28%, and 27% say that it's not strong enough. So Michigan also has the highest proportion of Arab American voters, a small but potentially important group. So let's play those clips.
I'm not gonna, at the end of the day, it's about the down ballots for me. There's a lot that happened over the year, and I think our government has been complicit, and they have, in not making decisions based on humanity and peace. I got families and people that I know that can't even put food on the table and put gas in their car, but yet we're sending billions of dollars everywhere else. I think we as a nation, as American citizens, need to let these politicians know that we are no longer standing by, and that we are holding you guys all accountable, no matter what party you're from.
I'm hoping that we can punish the Democratic Party for everything that's happened in the past year, to show them that we're not going to have unconditional support, and They can't fearmonger us about the Republican Party enough to be afraid to not vote for them.
I'm an Arab American, so hopefully the Arab American voice will be heard more, especially in what's happening in the Middle East and in Gaza and Lebanon. I'll stick to myself for that, but hopefully somebody who will bring peace to the world.
It makes me exhausted. Candidates are constantly here, massive election ad push. I think at the end of the day, something I'm really excited for is just to have all of that calm down at least a little bit.
Well, those were some of the voices from Michigan. Any thoughts listening to them?
Imam,
Brown?
Sorry
Can
about
you all
that.
hear me?
The first person who was amazing, she connected the domestic concern about economy and sending money abroad. So she connected the domestic with the foreign policy. So I thought, she has some points there.
Yeah. I think my observation is that, even though for many voters, we kind of think their top issues are abortion and the economy and no one really cares about Gaza, there really are a significant number of people outside the Muslim and Arab communities who are concerned about what happened in Gaza. Many of the protesters on college campuses were not Muslims or Arabs. They were Jewish kids and Black kids and white kids who were tired of seeing children being killed on their social media every day. And so, I just want to note that I think it's, the concern about Gaza is more widespread than I think the polls would indicate. Is it the top issue for most Americans? No, of course not. But I think it is an important issue for many Americans. And I think it absolutely contributed to the drag on Joe Biden's approval rating. I think it actually has contributed as well to some of the struggles the vice president has faced as the genocide continues.
So we have a few minutes as we're wrapping this 2-hour election coverage. Dr. Brown, some last thoughts as we look into tomorrow. How should we prepare for tomorrow? It might be too late for some of our organizations to prepare, but how would you suggest that people who are worried about violence, especially as election results come in, and not accepting of election results, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I hear people from both conservative and liberal families concerned about violence, and they're concerned about the other side. And I think one of the problems that we're having right now as a nation is we're in this period that political scientists refer to as affective polarization, which means not only are we very polarized politically, or we feel like we're very polarized politically, but we've polarized in such a way that we demonize the other people and the people connected to the other party, and we turn them into somebody who's evil as opposed to somebody who shares our community with us. And I think that's why everybody is so concerned about violence. And it's not just Democrats worried about Republican violence like January 6th. It's Republicans worried about Democrat violence. And I think the thing for everyone to do is to remember that we're all in this together, that we're, despite our differences, one nation, and that we have to work together. And that my expectation going into this election is that we wouldn't know for quite a while because of the amount of court challenges. And maybe that won't be the case. Maybe it will be clear tomorrow morning who the winner is. But what we all need to agree to do is to stop turning the other party and people connected to the other party into the enemy.
Imam Mujahid, any concluding thoughts? And Dr.
Well, there's just 1 minute left, so I will just stick to, at this moment, 178 for Trump, 99 for Harris, and New York Times has increased the chances of Trump winning to 73%.
So we're at the end of our coverage. We will be here again tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll be broadcasting both in the United States and on Islam Channel in the United Kingdom. We'll have special bulletins throughout the day on Muslim Network TV. And our election coverage will continue with more analysts tomorrow at 8 p.m. Please do join us. Thank you so much to all of you for staying with us. And assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi.
The 2024 U.S. presidential election is here, and Muslim Network TV is bringing you the coverage that matters, bringing you real-time results and in-depth conversations on what this election means for Muslim Americans and beyond. Our panel of experts, community voices, and political analysts will break down the night's key moments. This election is crucial, and we're here to keep you informed. November 5th and 6th at 8 p.m. Eastern on Muslim Network TV.